If Game of Thrones and Horrible Histories had a love child raised by Quentin Tarantino, you'd get something close to the real-life saga of history's most brutal empires. We're talking less Winter is Coming, and more Winter of Absolute Despair is already here and it's wearing spiked boots. The Assyrian Empire, 911-609 BCE. The Assyrian Empire wasn't exactly known for its gentle touch. These ancient conquerors wrote the book on intimidation tactics, and let's just say it wasn't a bedtime story. Ashurnasirpal II, who reigned from 883 to 859 BCE, set a high bar for brutality. After conquering Suru in 879 BCE, he had the rebel leader flayed alive and used his skin to cover the city walls. Talk about leaving a lasting impression on your neighbors. The Assyrians were inventive when it came to torture. Impalement became their trademark. They'd sharpen a pole, grease it up, and create a spectacle that would make even the bravest warrior think twice about resistance. Prisoners often waited days for their turn, probably contemplating their life choices. Mass deportations were another Assyrian specialty. King Tiglath-Pileser III, ruling from 745 to 727 BCE, perfected this strategy. During his 734 BCE campaign against Syria and Palestine, he relocated over 13,000 people. It was like a forced march meets musical chairs, Assyrian style. Sennacherib, who ruled from 705 to 681 BCE, took city destruction to new heights. In 689 BCE, he obliterated Babylon and diverted the Euphrates River to wash away the ruins. When it came to urban renewal, Sennacherib clearly believed in the burn it all down and start over approach. The notorious Ashurbanipal, reigning from 668 to 627 BCE, was known for his extensive library in Nineveh, but he also had a grim hobby, collecting enemy body parts. After defeating the Elamites in 653 BCE, he hung their king's head in his garden. Evidently, Ashurbanipal's idea of garden gnomes was a bit more extreme than most. The Assyrian Empire's reign of terror finally ended in 609 BCE when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes sacked Nineveh. After centuries of being the bullies of the ancient world, the Assyrians found out what it felt like to be on the receiving end. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, 550-330 BCE. The Achaemenid Persian Empire burst onto the world stage in 550 BCE, proving that when it comes to ruling with an iron fist, there's always room for innovation. Our story begins with Cyrus the Great, who apparently thought the Great wasn't quite enough of a title. In 539 BCE, he conquered Babylon, not by storming the gates, but by diverting the Euphrates and simply strolling in. It was less shock and awe and more, surprise, we're your new landlords. Darius I, ruling from 522 to 486 BCE, had a unique approach to quelling rebellions. In 518 BCE, he crushed the Babylonian uprising by impaling 3,000 of the city's leading citizens. Nothing says let's all get along quite like a forest of human skewers. Xerxes I, taking the throne in 486 BCE, decided to one-up his predecessors. When building a bridge across the Hellespont in 480 BCE for his invasion of Greece, he got a bit miffed when a storm destroyed it. His solution? He had the sea whipped 300 times and branded with hot irons. That'll teach those pesky waves. The Persians also perfected the art of psychological warfare. During the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BCE, Cambyses II used cats as shields, knowing the Egyptians wouldn't dare harm their sacred animals. It was the ancient equivalent of, I'm not hitting you, you're hitting yourself. But it wasn't all conquest and cruelty. The Persians also introduced the world's first postal service in 516 BCE. Of course, tampering with the king's mail was punishable by death, so think of it as FedEx with a side of mortal peril. The empire finally met its match in 330 BCE when Alexander the Great decided he wanted a piece of the action. After 2 centuries of Persian rule, it turned out there was always a bigger fish, or in this case, a more ambitious Macedonian. The Macedonian Empire, 336-323 BCE. Enter Alexander the Great, a man who looked at the known world and thought, I could probably own all of this. From 336 to 323 BCE, he embarked on a whirlwind tour of conquest that would make most travel influencers green with envy. In 335 BCE, Alexander kicked off his reign by crushing a Theban revolt. His idea of urban renewal, razing the entire city to the ground, except for temples and the house of the poet Pindar. Apparently, even megalomaniacs have a soft spot for good verse. The Siege of Tyre in 332 BCE showed Alexander's flair for the dramatic. When the city refused to surrender, he built a half-mile causeway to reach it. It was like an extreme edition of Extreme Makeover City Edition, except instead of a new community center, Tyre got total destruction. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander faced off against Darius III's massive Persian army. Outnumbered 5-1, Alexander still won, proving that sometimes it's not the size of the army, but how you use it. In India, Alexander's troops faced war elephants for the first time at the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BCE. His solution? Arrange his troops in a massive phalanx that looked like a giant hedgehog. Who knew that the key to defeating elephants was to cosplay as an oversized porcupine? But Alexander's most brutal moment came during his return from India. The march through the Gedrosian Desert in 325 BCE resulted in the deaths of 3/4 of his army. Turns out, the Great wasn't so great at reading maps or understanding basic human needs like water. Despite his short reign, Alexander's empire stretched from Greece to India. He founded over 70 cities, most of them named Alexandria. Talk about an ego trip. This guy was basically the ancient world's equivalent of a guy naming all his kids after himself. Alexander's empire crumbled soon after his death in 323 BCE, proving that while you can conquer the world, you can't take it with you. The Roman Empire, 27 BCE, 476 CE. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where togas were fashionable and conquest was always in season. From 27 BCE to 476 CE, Rome went from a small Italian city-state to the Mediterranean's biggest bully. Let's start with Julius Caesar, who kicked off Rome's imperial ambitions with a bang. During his Gallic Wars from 58 to 50 BCE, he managed to kill or enslave about a third of Gaul's population. That's roughly 1 million dead and another million enslaved. Caesar's famous quote, "I came, I saw, I conquered," should have included, "I depopulated." Next up, everyone's favorite madman, Caligula, who ruled from 37 to 41 CE. This charmer once wished the Roman people had a single neck so he could behead them all at once. He also tried to make his horse a consul. Clearly, he was more stable genius than we thought. Nero, emperor from 54 to 68 CE, took Rome's persecution of Christians to new heights. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, he blamed the Christians and turned them into human torches to light his gardens. Talk about taking light of the world way too literally. Let's not forget the Colosseum, opened in 80 CE under Titus. This massive arena could hold 50,000 spectators, all eager to watch gladiators fight to the death. It was like pay-per-view, but with more lions and less pay. The Roman Empire wasn't just about conquest and cruelty, though. They also gave us roads, aqueducts, and the calendar. Of course, they also gave us lead pipes, which might explain some of their crazier emperors. In 212 CE, Emperor Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to all free men in the empire. It wasn't out of the goodness of his heart, though. He just wanted to tax more people. Ancient Rome, where even citizenship came with a catch. The empire finally fell in 476 CE when Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. After nearly 500 years, it turned out Rome wasn't so eternal after all. But hey, at least they left us some cool ruins to take selfies with. The Mongol Empire, where horseback riding and world domination went hand in hand. From 1206 to 1368, these steppe warriors redefined the meaning of going global. It all kicked off with Genghis Khan, the man who united the Mongol tribes in 1206. His idea of diplomacy? Submit or die. Not exactly a master of subtlety, our Genghis. In 1219, Genghis launched his invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. When the Shah insulted Mongol ambassadors, Genghis responded by obliterating entire cities. Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench, all reduced to rubble. Urban planning, Mongol style, if it exists, destroy it. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 under Hulagu Khan was particularly brutal. The Mongols destroyed the House of Wisdom, dumping so many books into the Tigris that the river ran black with ink. Talk about taking throw the book at them too literally. Let's not forget Timur, who ruled from 1370 to 1405. He had a penchant for building pyramids of skulls. After conquering Delhi in 1398, he massacred 100,000 prisoners and used their heads to build several towers. Clearly, Timur thought skyscraper meant something very different. The Mongols weren't all about destruction, though. They established the Yam, a vast postal system spanning their empire. Of course, This mostly served to relay orders for more conquest and destruction. But hey, points for efficiency. Under Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, the empire reached its peak. He completed the conquest of China in 1279, establishing the Yuan dynasty. Kublai even tried invading Japan, twice. Both times, his fleets were destroyed by typhoons. The Japanese called it divine wind, kamikaze. The Mongols probably called it really bad luck. The Mongol Empire eventually fragmented and was finally ousted from China in 1368. Their legacy? A death toll in the tens of millions, a new world order, and the dubious honor of creating the largest contiguous land empire in history. Not bad for a bunch of nomads who started out herding goats. The Aztec Empire. Welcome to the Aztec Empire, where human sacrifice was just another day at the office. From 1428 to 1521, these Mesoamerican powerhouses turned central Mexico into a theocratic state with a bloodthirsty twist. The empire kicked off in 1428 when Tenochtitlan formed a triple alliance with Texcoco and Tlacopan. Their motto might as well have been "Go big or go home." By 1519, they controlled most of central Mexico. At the heart of Aztec culture was human sacrifice, and boy, did they take it seriously. During the reconsecration of the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan in 1487, they sacrificed an estimated 80,400 prisoners in just 4 days. That's 20,100 hearts ripped out per day. Talk about a grueling work schedule. The Aztecs also had a unique approach to warfare called the Flower Wars. These ritualized battles were specifically designed to capture prisoners for sacrifice. Imagine going to war not to kill your enemies, but to take them home for a deadly dinner party. Montezuma II, who ruled from 1502 to 1520, took Aztec brutality to new heights. He expanded the empire aggressively and ramped up human sacrifice. His daily menu reportedly included the flesh of sacrificed young boys. Talk about a leader with exotic tastes. The Aztecs weren't all about bloodshed, though. They created sophisticated systems of agriculture, education, and medicine. They even had a form of universal education, although the curriculum probably included Sacrifice 101. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was a marvel of engineering built on a lake. With a population of 200,000, it was one of the largest cities in the world. Of course, it also had a giant pyramid where they ripped out hearts, so it wasn't exactly a tourist paradise. The empire met its match in 1519 when Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés showed up. By 1521, the Aztec Empire had fallen. Turns out, all that human sacrifice didn't make them immune to smallpox or Spanish cannons. The Spanish Empire. Ahoy, mateys, let's set sail with the Spanish Empire, where the sun never set and neither did the ambition. From 1492 to 1976, Spain went from a newly unified kingdom to a global powerhouse that would make even Midas blush. It all kicked off in 1492 when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered the Americas. Of course, the millions of people already living there were a bit surprised to learn they needed discovering. The real brutality began with the conquistadors. Take Hernán Cortés, who landed in Mexico in 1519 with 600 men and left the Aztec Empire in ruins by 1521. His secret? A lethal combination of guns, germs, and steel, plus a hefty dose of backstabbing and manipulation. Francisco Pizarro followed suit in Peru, capturing the Inca Emperor Atahualpa in 1532. Despite receiving a room filled with gold and silver as ransom, Pizarro executed Atahualpa anyway. Talk about a bad refund policy. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, took religious persecution to new levels. Under Torquemada, Grand Inquisitor from 1483 to 1498, thousands were tortured and executed. Their crime? Not being Catholic enough. Clearly, these guys took fashion police way too seriously. In 1492, the same year Columbus set sail, Spain expelled its Jewish population. About 200,000 Jews were forced to convert or leave. The Muslims got the boot in 1501. Spain's idea of diversity was apparently limited to different types of Catholics. The empire wasn't all doom and gloom, though. They did introduce Europe to chocolate, potatoes, and tomatoes. Of course, they also introduced the Americas to smallpox, so let's call it a mixed bag. Spain's vast empire began to crumble in the 19th century, with most of Latin America gaining independence. They clung to Cuba until 1898, losing it in a war with the United States. Talk about a bad century. The empire officially ended in 1976 when Spain gave up its last African colonies. After nearly 500 years, the empire where the sun never set finally called it a day. The Ottoman Empire. Step right up to the Ottoman Empire. where sultans ruled supreme and expansion was always on the menu. From 1299 to 1922, these guys turned a small Turkish state into a transcontinental powerhouse that would make even Alexander the Great say, "Not bad." It all started with Osman I, who founded the empire in 1299. His descendants clearly took the family business seriously. By the 16th century, they controlled much of Southeast Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa. The Ottomans had a unique way of building their army, the devşirme system. They'd snatch up Christian boys, convert them to Islam, and train them as elite soldiers called janissaries. Talk about an extreme recruitment policy. Mehmed the Conqueror lived up to his name in 1453 when he captured Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire. He turned the Hagia Sophia from a cathedral into a mosque, which is one way to redecorate after moving in. Suleiman the Magnificent, ruling from 1520 to 1566, brought the empire to its zenith. He besieged Vienna in 1529, expanded into Hungary, and even allied with France against Habsburg Austria. Clearly, he took magnificent as a challenge, not a compliment. The Ottomans weren't just about conquest, though. They were surprisingly tolerant for their time, allowing religious minorities to practice their faiths, as long as they paid the jizya tax. Freedom of religion, but make it profitable. However, things took a dark turn in the empire's later years. The Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1916 saw the systematic extermination of 1.5 million Armenians. It was a brutal reminder that even tolerant empires can commit unspeakable atrocities. The empire's decline was a slow burn. They lost Greece in 1832, Egypt became independent in all but name by 1867, and the Balkan states slipped away in the early 20th century. World War I delivered the final blow. The Ottomans picked the losing side, and by 1922, the once mighty empire was reduced to modern-day Turkey. The sick man of Europe had finally succumbed, leaving behind a complex legacy of cultural fusion, architectural wonders, and cautionary tales about the dangers of imperial overreach. The Belgian Congo Free State. Welcome to the Belgian Congo Free State, where free was the biggest misnomer since the Holy Roman Empire. From 1885 to 1908, this wasn't so much a colony as King Leopold II's personal playground of terror. It all began in 1885 when Leopold II of Belgium convinced other European powers to grant him personal ownership of the Congo Basin, an area 76 times larger than Belgium. Leopold marketed his venture as a humanitarian and philanthropic mission to civilize the Congolese. In reality, it was all about extracting rubber and other resources. Spoiler alert, there was nothing humanitarian about it. The Force Publique, Leopold's private army, enforced rubber quotas with brutal efficiency. Their motto might as well have been, "Hand over the rubber, or we'll take your hands," and they meant it literally. Soldiers were required to provide a severed hand for every bullet used, to prove they hadn't wasted ammunition on hunting. Villages that failed to meet rubber quotas faced horrific consequences. Men were murdered, women were raped, and children had their hands chopped off. It was a reign of terror that would make even the most hardened dictators wince. The death toll? Estimates range from 3 to 15 million Congolese. That's about half the country's population. Leopold managed to depopulate an area the size of Western Europe without so much as setting foot in the Congo. Meanwhile, Leopold was using his ill-gotten gains to build lavish public works in Belgium. The royal greenhouses of Laeken and the Cinquantenaire Arch in Brussels were essentially funded by Congolese blood. The horrors of the Congo Free State eventually came to light, thanks in part to missionaries and journalists like Eddy Morel. International pressure forced Leopold to give up his private fiefdom in 1908. The Belgian Congo Free State stands as one of the most brutal regimes in history. It wasn't the longest-lasting empire, but in just 23 years, it managed to set new standards for colonial cruelty. Leopold II, proof that sometimes the real monsters wear crowns. The Third Reich, 1933 to 1945. Welcome to the Third Reich, where fascism met fanaticism and the world trembled. From 1933 to 1945, Nazi Germany wrote one of the darkest chapters in human history. It all began when Adolf Hitler, a failed artist with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Rhineland, became chancellor in 1933. Within months, he had transformed Germany into a one-party state. Democracy? More like goodbye crazy. The Nazis wasted no time implementing their racist ideology. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 stripped Jews of their citizenship and prohibited them from marrying or having relations with persons of German or related blood. Apparently, the Nazis thought they were not just a political party, but a particularly nasty dating service. Then came the Night of Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht, in November 1938. In one night, Nazi thugs destroyed 267 synagogues and 7,000 Jewish businesses. It was urban renewal, Nazi style. World War II kicked off in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics initially seemed unstoppable. France fell in just 6 weeks in 1940, prompting the Germans to wonder why they'd had so much trouble with it in the previous war. But the real horror was yet to come. The Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable, remains one of the most horrific genocides in history. The Nazis industrialized mass murder, turning death camps into grotesque assembly lines. Nazi scientists conducted brutal experiments on prisoners. Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death, was particularly infamous for his twin studies at Auschwitz. Mad scientists were no longer just for comic books. The tide turned against Germany after their invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 and the entry of the US into the war. By 1945, the Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years had crumbled after only 12.